Okay. Well, with Raynell joining us, that means that all of our panelists are here. So I think we can go ahead and get started. I want to welcome everyone to our Orca Salmon Month webinar. My name is Stephanie Raymond, and I'm the program manager for Orca Network. And I'd like to begin by introducing our esteemed guests, Raynell Morris with the Lummi Nation and Children of the Setting Sun Productions, Joe Gatos, who is Science Director at the CDOC Society, Michael Weiss, Research Director at the Center for Whale Research, who may be off screen a bit with operating with limited Wi-Fi, and Natalie Sanderson, a youth activist extraordinaire, who's going to make us all hopeful as we go through this tonight. I also want to recognize the Orca Network staff and board that are present here tonight. Cindy Hansen is in the background running all of our tech and will be monitoring the chat. And I know that Lucy Miller, Sarah Rose, Sage Malak, Rachel Height, Serena Tierra, and Nicole D'Amato are all registered in the audience as well, and Howard Garrett, our co-founder and board president. So now let's take some time to acknowledge that we are occupying the lands of the ancestral and present-day Coast Salish peoples who have been stewards of the Salish Sea since time immemorial. May we respect Coast Salish rights to sovereignty and self-determination, and uplift Indigenous voices and initiatives as we become better listeners and learners as a community. And I'd like to get a little housekeeping out of the way before we go any further. We do have captioning enabled for this webinar. So if you would like to have captions, go ahead and click the Show Captions button that you should see on the bottom of your screen. We have scheduled this webinar to last until 8 p.m. and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. We also want to get a conversation going. So I just want everyone to be aware that we might run over time a little bit. You're free to leave at 8 if you need to, and we will send around a recording. We have currently enabled chat so that all participants can share their thoughts with everyone else. You should also be able to react with emojis during the conversation if you wish. We're all here because we care deeply about the southern resident killer whales, and there is a diverse range of ideas about what is the best thing or things that we can do for them. So we may not always agree, but the expectation is that any conversation in the chat remains civil and respectful. So Cindy will be monitoring the chat and will change settings if that becomes necessary. Oh, and our executive director and other co-founder, Susan Berta, has just joined us as well. So hello, Susan, glad you can make it. Some of you have sent questions in ahead, and thank you for that. I'm sure that others will have questions too, and Cindy will be noting those as they come in. We'll take as many as we have time for after all of our presenters have spoken. So it seems clear to me that this topic is one that people are really interested in. We had an amazing number of registrants, and we have, looks like 68 people signed in at the moment. So I'm going to make a few assumptions about who has registered for this webinar. I'm going to guess that you are passionate about whales, and in particular, those precious 73 whales left alive in the southern resident killer whale population that, according to Center for Whale Research's most recent survey results released on October 7th. And I'm going to assume that you are frustrated, sad, and probably even angry that 20 years after the southern residents were first listed as an endangered species in Washington state, and over 20 years in Canada, despite untold amounts of money and hours spent, great research discoveries and abundant data, and numerous rules and regulatory changes, we still don't see this population recovering. We know that salmon populations are struggling for many reasons, and the changing climate exacerbates their struggles. We know that shipping traffic is increasing throughout the Salish Sea and is projected to continue to do so. We know that there are persistent chemicals in the ecosystem that present health challenges to the southern residents and to us, that in some cases continue to enter the ecosystem and in all cases are extremely difficult to clean up. And we know that the southern resident population is genetically limited. Last week, Chris Dunnigan with the University of Washington Institute for Puget Sound posted an article citing a paper published in April in the journal Communications, Earth and Environment that again raised the specter of extinction for the southern residents. And the article contained a quote that has stayed with me since I read it, and here is what that quote said. A new scientific article authored by 17 killer whale experts suggests that if the population decline of southern resident orcas continues, their extinction will occur within the full view of scientists and a society unwilling or unable to make changes. A society unwilling or unable to make changes. That really struck me. So how is tonight going to change that? We have with us 4 remarkable people who have each done incredible work on behalf of the southern resident orcas, coming at this work from different angles. And we also have all of you who have joined us this evening. That's a lot of brain power and proof that at least part of our society is willing and able to make changes, because that's why we're here, right? So I'm eager to hear both from our experts and from you. Why aren't the southern residents recovering? What do we need to do differently or better to make that recovery happen? And how can we do that? So please keep these questions in mind as we hear from our experts. Share your thoughts in the chat, and let's get this conversation started. Raynell, would you please start us off with some insight on the Indigenous relationship to the southern residents? Thank you so much for being here. Oh, and could you please unmute?
Hi, Stephanie, and to the rest of the panel. This is an important discussion to have, and it needs to spurt more action, more active movement to saving them. But I want to traditionally introduce myself. Skilahela Senesnet, Raynell Morris Senesnet, Chaklamisan. That's my traditional name is Skilahela. My English name is Raynell Morris. I'm from the Lummi Nation. We are the people, the survivors of the Great Flood. And a lot of what I'm going to share tonight are teachings that were handed down from my Exala, my teacher, our late Chief Salik. And what he has said is the winged, the finned, the two-legged, the four-legged are all our relatives and should be respected as such, because what happens to them happens to us. In particular, Quethalmachan, the orcas, they are a close relative of ours. There's this kinship that we share. And the late Chief Salik said, what happens to them happens to us. They go extinct, what happens to us? And we can see their community is suffering, starving for salmon. They're ill. You look at our tribal communities, the same thing. We're fishing salmon people. We're not able to be on the water, but hours at a time instead of a whole season. Our people suffer from that mental health, addiction, and we're just not healthy communities. The southern resident killer whales, our Quethalmachan relatives, are not healthy, happy people. So it's important for us to take ownership of what we have done to them, what we've done to them in the name of progress, all the dams that were created, and the resistance that we get when we know it's the right thing to do. If we want to save salmon, we want to save Quethalmachan and orcas. If we want to restore the Salish Sea, the dams have to come down. And it's been proven numerous times. We start in our own coastal region with the Elba. 13 plus years ago, they entered into the efforts of removing the dams. They did it. They harvested salmon. It comes back. I was down with the Klamath people, with the Yurok, and we did prayers on the reservoir. And what their people shared with us is that when that river was rerouted and the dams put up and it dried up, their people dried up. They weren't able to do what they traditionally do. Now, with the removal of the Klamath River dams, water's flowing. We had a salmon come back. So we look at the Snake River, the 4 lower Snake River dams. What we see, the study after study after study after study, every time the government or an agency or the opposing groups release these concerns and studies, there's faults to them. They're unfounded. And yet we see the population of our salmon go down, go down, go down. When you can count salmon, you look at the 1980s when it was in abundance. We didn't have to count our salmon. We count them now. Our tribes get an allotment for our people, for ceremony, for funerals, for celebrations. We're lucky to get 1 or 2 salmon a year for that. Our freezers don't have salmon in it. Our freezers don't have clams, oysters, and crab. So this goes along with what our late chief Salik taught us. What is happening there is happening to us. And it's not just Indigenous people. It's all of us in the community that are suffering. And we need to do an acoustic audit on the Salish Sea. What is the baseline? What's the tipping point? We think we know we've passed the tipping point. We saw during COVID, when there weren't ships on the water, where there wasn't, sports fishing, when there wasn't whale watching, when the waters were calm and clear, wildlife came back. Our relatives, the salmon, the birds, the crabs, all started to flourish. The same happened in our forest because we quit cutting down trees and we stayed out of the forest. They came back. There were pictures around the globe of the wildlife beings, our relatives coming back. And as soon as the shelter in place was lifted, as soon as we started going about doing what we do, they had to retreat for their own safety, for their own well-being. So we know what we need to do. We just haven't made the decision to do it. It's as simple as that. We know if we do an acoustic audit, that's going to say there's too much noise pollution in the Salish Sea. It is affecting our Quithomich and our orcas, their ability to gather, their ability to hunt, their ability to just be with one another. They have to be on guard. When they used to just touch each other and sleep in a line, they can't do that anymore because there's too many threats. Our fishermen, our tribal fishermen, are under threat with these big tankers coming out of Roberts Bank too. There's a project that's proposed up there to put larger tankers, over 200 more vessels on our Salish Sea. And we know the Navy wanted to do explosive testing on our Salish Sea. And we had to stand up and say, we don't approve this. We need to tell you why. And we met with them. So we need to unite. We need to stand up together. And we need to create this movement to do what we know is right and stick to it and hold our politicians accountable. Because it's been proven when we went to save Wachia and Cherry Point against the largest coal terminal, we were successful because we reunited as an Indigenous people. We reunited with the people around us in our community to say, not here. No, you don't. Not here. And it was defeated. It is still under threat because there's other proposals that come around. But it's really kind of, I see what our late chief said. We know what we need to do. What is it going to take for us to do it together, to walk on the same path together, to talk the same talk together, to take action together. We know what to do. We need to do it. And if we change and get the community and the public will strong, all going in the same way, it will change political will. We know that it's happened before and it can happen again. There's hope. It's not too late for salmon. It's not too late for Quithalamich and orcas, but we are getting really close. So we have time to fix it. We have time to heal Mother Earth. We have time to heal our relatives. We have time to ask for forgiveness, and we can do it together. Haishka CM, Nostalgia CEM.
Thank you, Raynell. Thank you for getting us fired up to the start. This is exactly what we were hoping for tonight. So I'd like now to ask Joe if you could please say a few words about a comparison of the Salish Sea marine mammal populations and anything else you'd like to add along those lines.
Yeah, well, first I'd like to say thanks for having me. And Raynell, thank you for that really impassioned speech. There's nothing worse than giving a talk after somebody like you that's so inspiring. And I do appreciate what you pointed out, all of the stuff that you and the Lummi have done. And the coal terminal is a great example. That was just a place where there were a lot of people that were head over heels and worried about that, but were unable to take action. And you all stood up and said, no, this is against our tribal treaty rights, and it just totally shut down. And there's just no way to let you know how grateful that we all are for you for doing that.
But you stood with us. So
Oh, for sure, 100%. And like you said, we do need to stand together. And I'll bring up some slides. I have some slides and some pictures because I'm not as passionate a speaker as Raynell, but I'll share some slides. I want to talk about the marine mammals. And so I just have some images that I'll share as well, and what's happening in the Salish Sea. So thank you again to Orca Network for having me, and thank you for producing this great graphic. Some years ago, we figured out that there are 37 mammals that use the Salish Sea. I'm not going to go through all those tonight. Many of them are not what we consider marine mammals, ones like river otters, but are dependent on it. We don't think of animals like deer, but deer come down and forage in the intertidal. We have visitors or very rare animals. I'm not going to talk about things like ribbon seals and things like belugas. But what I really want to do is kind of just focus on some of the more common marine mammals, talk about how those populations are doing. And I want to just give a lot of credit. Earlier, Stephanie pointed out the Puget Sound Institute's Chris Dunnigan's talk, and they have a great website, Encyclopedia of Puget Sound. And this is really designed for anybody to be able to go and look at status and trends, whether you're a reporter or you're a citizen or an advocate. And so nothing I say is really magic tonight. This is stuff that's just freely available to everybody. But I'll go through, harbor seals. I think there's not many people out there who feel like we have harbor seals that are in trouble. We have a lot of harbor seals, very high density. There are places in the world where they don't, and they're worried about them, but not here. And this is a graph. This is basically looking just at the Strait of Georgia. And you see the population from 1970 when we had the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and then also similarly in Canada, stopping of shooting them. And that population stabled out in the 1990s, has been pretty stable since. We don't have super current data for the whole Washington side, but this is from some work looking at harbor seals in San Juan County. And same thing, population went up into the 90s and has really stayed stable. There aren't a lot of points between 2000 and 2020, but populations are relatively stable. One thing that's really important to remember is that these are kind of like raccoons. Harbor seals are generalists. So they eat over 60 species of fish and invertebrates. They definitely have things that they're interested in. And so some work that's been done in multiple areas. We know they eat salmon, they eat herring, they eat sand lance, anchovies, shiner perch. In other areas, Pacific hake, Pacific herring, comprising almost half of their diet. And we know that they'll adjust their foraging behavior in relationship to what's available, and that varies by season to season. So these animals are kind of non-specialist generalists, just kind of built to get whatever's out there. Stellar sea lion is a very similar story. We don't have as many stellar sea lions in the area. They're quite bigger. But these animals also will eat salmon. They'll eat herring, sand lance, things like that. Populations, you'll see all of these populations from Alaska all the way down to California are increasing over time. Data are not up to date for 2024, but all of these are statistically significant except California. So populations are rising. And like I said, we know that they'll eat salmon. They also eat pollock, hake, rockfish, skates, smelt. They're generalists. Okay, they're very similar to harbor seals in that they're going to take whatever is available to them. California sea lions, same thing, right? The population for estimates for not just in the Salish Sea, but in all for the entire California sea lion population has gone up, 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 and it's just now reaching a point where we think it's probably at equilibrium or carrying capacity. And then in the Salish Sea, we have maybe about 450 or so in Puget Sound in the spring, and we can have as many as 3,000 in the entirety of Washington's inland waters in the spring as well. Again, very generalist eaters, okay? Pacific whiting, jack mackerel, Pacific mackerel, blacksmith, rockfish, herring, bass, salmonids, cephalopods, which are like octopus and squid. Same story again. That's probably why these populations are doing well. Harbor porpoise really pretty much disappeared from Admiralty Inlet down, and nobody really understands why that was. Some people feel it was noise. It may have been gill netting, but these populations are just booming. And this is some population data from Department of Fish and Wildlife, looking at a couple different areas from some aerial surveys, and you can see those lines going up, up, up in all of the different areas over the different years. Again, we don't have a great idea there, but there are some different studies on harbor porpoise diet. They're generalists, looking just at stranding data, animals that have died, anywhere from 12 to 17 different species are found in their stomachs. Herring, walleye, pollock, hake, sand lance, very common. And then this is a picture of one from Pacific Marine Mammal Research. They can catch salmon. Are they major predators of salmon? We don't think so. We don't think that they're probably even really eating that many adult salmon, but they do surprise us on occasion. Okay, so let's talk about whales. Gray whales also coming back, right? And we're really a stop-off site for them, but that population is growing. The entire gray whale population is about 18,000 animals. It has gone up and down because of some mortality events, but basically they're not on the endangered species list anymore. And so we have the Pacific Coast Feeding Group on the outside, and we have the sounders that'll come in to Whidbey, Camano, in that area. These animals are not really kind of fish eaters. They're very generalists. We know that they make a living. The sounders make a living probably because a lot of the ghost shrimp that they're eating, but they're benthic feeders. They're going to feed on whatever is available to them that's out there. Okay, minke whales, the smallest of the baleen whales. We don't understand a lot about them. There are some people doing some photo ID work. We know that they will move around from different seasons. We know that they'll go from here, probably going into warmer waters because of scars that we see from cookie cutter sharks on these animals. These animals also are very flexible in their food choice. They'll eat plankton, but they'll also eat herring, capelin, things like that. And, they may prefer to eat herring, but when it's not there, they can eat krill as well. Humpback whales are very similar. The humpback comeback is very similar or very familiar to a lot of you out there. The North Pacific population has dramatically increased. John Kalambakidis and his group has been watching this in the Salish Sea, and the sightings are just going up and up and up. You can see that they're occurring all over the inland waters of Washington and British Columbia. And we have populations that come from Hawaii, Mexico, and Central America. These animals, we think of them as eating a lot of fish, but they can actually switch from krill to fish, and then, anchovies, sardines, herring, things like that, and then back to krill. So as the oceanic conditions change, these animals can change their diet as well. And what we get to tonight is really talking about killer whales and the different ecotypes. And so we know with the big killer whales that, these animals have been documented eating many different species of marine mammals, and then also harassing, if not eating, many bird species in the area. But they're eating what's available. They're eating harbor seals, they're eating stellars, they're eating harbor porpoise, Dall's porpoise, California sea lions, things like that. This is a paper by Monica Weiland-Shields, and looking at occurrences of different social groupings over time. The important thing to take home here is that population is growing. This is interesting because there's a lot of similarities, like the contaminants, same amount of noise, but the diet is different than the southern residents. And so I don't need to get deep into southern residents and their natural history, but we know there's a lot of things. But I want to just point out that we've been affecting salmon and Chinook salmon for hundreds of years, and southern residents are animals. They don't have refrigerators, right? They're moving up and down the coast to different areas looking for salmon, specifically Chinook salmon, but also eating coho, chum, other things like that, looking for them to find that and eat that. So we think about the the contaminants and the noise. Why does it affect these animals differently? Think about kind of like the process of how these things work, okay? You have a population that's a high toxin burden. That has implications for first young. Same thing would go on with bigs or transient killer whales, but doesn't seem to be hindering that population. When you have reduced salmon, right? So you have a different prey availability here, and then you have noise. Noise also is making it more difficult for them to find salmon that are already scarce. Then you go through times of fasting when they're not finding enough food. And this sort of nutritional stress, that's what causes them to metabolize these contaminants. Otherwise, they just stay in the fat. They're not biologically active. They're not affecting their cellular and their humoral immunity. And then you can get this immunosuppression. You can get exposure to diseases. So really, it's a lot of different processes that are affecting southern residents. We still see contaminants in harbor seals. We see it in stellar sea lions. But because they're able to move their diet around, it's not affecting that population. These animals still have issues with noise, but it's that sort of thing. Once you get to a certain level in your population and all of these things are playing a part, you really have to address all of that. And so, but that said, we can't just bring back salmon. And I kind of give this kind of jokingly to think about it, but we have to work on salmon 100%, but we also have to work on the noise issue. We also have to work on the issue of contaminants. And if you go to your doctor and you say, I just need to eat better, actually you need to eat better, you need to exercise more, you need to stop smoking. We need to be addressing all of these things. And Stephanie talked about this paper a little bit earlier. This is a population viability analysis that Rob Williams did recently. And what they're showing is that even by addressing all of these things and addressing injured or sick animals, especially females that are valuable for reproduction in the population, we're still going to be challenged to get this population up to a 1%, not even the 2.3% that we want to see. So the moral of this story is that while we do have a lot of marine mammals that are really doing well, this is a very unique example of animals that are very specialized in what they're doing. And unfortunately, what they've specialized to do is now under stress and greatly reduced because of things we've been doing over the past couple hundred years. So we can get more into this with discussions later tonight, but our legislature does salmon recovery for a few years, and then they feel like, okay, let's move on to traffic or homelessness or schools. It's our job to remind them that we need to continually work on this. And then it's our job to also remind ourselves that the Klamath dams are coming down, but it still takes some years for those salmon to come back. We've invested a lot of money into culverts, but that still takes time. So, we need to, it's one of these things like exercise or eating right. You continually have to work on that. And our elected officials need external pressure on that. So thanks so much. I'm going to leave it with that and just wait till we can open up and have some more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate that perspective, and it makes me think about something we used to say when I worked at People for Puget Sound about it's not rocket science. It's more complicated than that. That really looking at that whole big picture of things is, and all of it at once is part of the issue here.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Michael, if you could please now bring us something about the demographics of the existing population and their effective population size. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi. Yeah, really glad to be here. I don't have quite as polished a presentation, I think, as the previous two speakers. All I'm really going to talk about is quickly kind of give an update on where we're at with the Southern residents' demography and reproductive potential as of kind of our last census, and talk a little bit about where that might be going in the future and where we might need it to go. So I don't have any slides. I'm just gonna chat through it. So as was kind of said at the start, the Southern residents as of July 1st of this year had 73 individuals. That's a report we published on this month. So what that means is, as of that exact date, using all of our census data, which we do using photo ID from before and after that date, we are pretty sure that there were 73 animals on that date. We very rarely know exactly how many animals there are in the population on any given day, unless we're lucky enough to, have a super pod and actually see everybody. So of those 73 individuals, only 24 of them are reproductive aged females who are not currently lactating and didn't have a known calf last year. That's important because in our data, we've never seen a lactating female have another calf, and killer whales have about an 18-month gestation period, so you don't see them having calves 2 years in a row. So as of the census, this last census, our kind of total reproductive female population is 24 animals. That's split between 9 animals in J pod, 5 animals in K pod, and 10 in L pod. That's not ideal. It aligns fairly closely with genetic estimates of kind of current effective population size from works our colleagues at NOAA have done, putting it, about 25 individuals. So while we have those 24 animals, those 24 females, it's not even quite that rosy. So there are 4 of those females who have never successfully had a calf despite being within reproductive age. So J46, K36, J36 had a calf that died quite quickly, and up until this September, we would have put L90 in that category as well. Her showing up with L128 is the oldest kind of first calf we've ever seen in the population. In addition, 14 of those 24 calves have at least one son. And this is important because we've looked at the data on what predicts reproduction in these whales in terms of their social environment. And it turns out females who have sons, who are caring for sons, are much less likely to reproduce, maybe 50 to 30% of the reproductive output of females of the same age who don't have sons. So 14 of those 24 reproductive age females who could reproduce this year are already taking care of at least one son. So that really leaves us with 10 females who could reproduce and are likely to reproduce within, a given year. Obviously, not every female who is capable of reproducing does every year. So when we fit our models and we estimate our parameters, age-specific fecundity and correlations between survival and reproduction, our median estimate, so when we run all of our simulations, the average kind of estimate is that we might get 2 calves within the next 12 months. that would be pretty good. There's a whole bunch of those simulations where we don't get any calves within the next 12 months. And there's some worlds in which we get, up to 7 calves. It's really hard with the small population and with as much what we call demographic and environmental stochasticity, to easily predict what's going to happen year to year, even when you have quite good data. As Joe kind of mentioned, the delisting criteria for the southern residents is to have a population growth rate of 2.3% over I believe, 28-year period. We have rarely hit that even for a single year in the whole course of the study. In order to get there, there's a few different ways you can do that, right? Population growth is a product of 2 important vital rates, reproduction and survival. I've been talking about the reproductive potential. So one thing that could happen is if we had a lot more females over a long period of time and a larger portion of the population was represented by reproductive age females, maybe that gets you there to, probably not 2.3%, but 1%. Now, that's not something we can influence, right? We can't decide whether female killer whales have male or female offspring, as far as we know. The other way to do it is you increase survival rates and you increase reproductive rates. Survival rates are very, very strongly correlated with Chinook salmon availability. So these, indices, these area-based indices of Chinook salmon abundance. Not surprising, I'm guessing, to this crowd, but a significant increase to Chinook availability would increase survival rates quite a bit. The link with reproduction is less clear. Now, part of that is just a sample size issue. Reproductive rates, we only have those. So, for example, in this year, when we're looking at a sample size of whether individuals survive or not, we can look at the whole population. Whereas when we're looking at a sample size of who reproduces, we have a much smaller number of individuals. So it takes longer to understand the statistical relationship between the environment and reproduction compared to the environment and survival. It may also be that there's just a less clear relationship between our measures of salmon abundance and reproduction, potentially because these whales are stressed fairly, regularly, even at what is relatively high levels of salmon for the last few decades. Those toxicants that Joe mentioned, a lot of what they do is mess with reproductive cycles. We're still kind of trying to understand the dose response within killer whales or marine mammals generally, but that's fairly well established. And from the hormone data, we know that pregnancies are more likely to fail in females who are nutritionally stressed. So what can we do to get the population up to 1% or 2.3%? There's really no big silver bullet. There's no one thing we can do. As Joe said, if we just fix salmon, unless we really, really fix salmon very quickly, we might not get there. I think the flip side of that coin that's important to mention, that is, in tandem with that point, while a strategy of just trying to increase salmon abundance isn't likely to recover the population to the degree we'd like, there's really no strategy that we can implement that doesn't include increasing salmon abundance that will lead to recovery. So salmon abundance is necessary, but maybe not sufficient to get the population recovering. So we do need to look at toxicants, we do need to look at noise, and we need to look at potential, other health risks from inbreeding and disease. But if we can't do just those things, any one of those strategies or any combination of them has to include recovering salmon populations if we are going to increase the population and get them to that growing stage. And I'm going to kind of cut myself off there and save the rest for the discussion so we can have plenty of time.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. That was sobering and but really a good perspective, and it's great how it ties right into what Joe and Reno both have said. So Natalie, I'm really excited for you now to share what you have done and what you are doing with everyone tonight. So please go ahead when you're ready.
All right, I'll just share my screen. Okay. All right, so I'm Natalie. I'm 14, and like all of you, I care a lot about the orcas. So I do a lot of environmental work, and so I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that I've done with my group and how we can get youth involved in orca recovery. So I started my school's first environmental club when I was in 6th grade with my 2 advisors, which were a school counselor and a math teacher, and they were amazing. We focused a lot on different environmental issues and tackling those issues with projects in the community. We did 2 different audits, a stormwater runoff audit and a waste audit. Oh wait, I clicked to the next slide too early. But so for our waste audit, we did a waste sort, and then we did a school-wide cleanup, and then we did a sharing cart at our lunch. And then for their stormwater runoff audit, which applies more to the orcas, we measured the amount of stormwater runoff on our school grounds. We found heavy rainfall areas, and we looked into our storm drains, and then we cleared out a section in between our fields to plant plants and remove blackberry and ivy and invasive species. And then for the past 2 years, Swan Creek on the first Sunday of every month to do restoration work. And I think it's a great way to start off the month because it helps salmon so directly, and you can see how much of an impact it makes just in like the 2 hours that we're there. And it's going for the 2 years, just seeing how much the creek has changed and seeing how much of an impact we can make on salmon habitat, I think is really inspiring. And now this is another slide about our what kind of some of our projects. But now I am starting Roots and Shoots group. Last March, after I published my novel for Tokate, I had the most life-changing experience, and I got to meet Dr. Jean Goodall, which was amazing, and I'm so grateful for that experience. And that has inspired me to start a Roots and Shoots group. Roots and Shoots is a program under the Jean Goodall Institute for youth activists, and there are 3 parts of Roots and Shoots: helping people, animals, and the environment. It focuses on tackling different social and environmental issues with community projects. Our group is the first in Washington State, and I'm really hoping and really excited to do more projects and to expand our group. And we just had our first project actually, and we did a clothing drive for the elementary school in our district. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can get youth involved in orcas, or with helping orcas. So I think that youth involvement is important for the community and for ourselves and the activists themselves. So this is the world that we're being left with, so I think that it's important for us to be able to speak up for it. And in my experience, the conservation community has been very encouraging of me, so I think that's really great. And I would really like to see more people my age getting involved with helping the orcas and doing more projects and collaborating. And I think it also helps ourselves because by advocating for something, you're learning to really care about it. Because why would you put so much effort into fighting for something if you didn't care? And so you're learning how to care and have empathy and love something enough to fight for it, which I think is very healing and is something that a lot of people really need. So it's not only important for our community, but it's important for ourselves. And I think by having environmental groups for kids and teenagers, you're planting the seed in their head that what you say matters and you can make a change. And then I also think that by having a focusing on our ecosystem and what's like around here is really important because we're so extremely lucky to have the orcas and the Salish Sea. And I really want to share that with other people my age so they can feel the same love and feel inspired by them like I do, and then grow and become more motivated to help the orcas. I'm not really sure. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I believe that one of the main reasons why I care so much about the environment is because of some of my experience I've had with nature and with the orcas. But unfortunately, not everyone has access to spending time in nature. And if they don't have those memories in nature, then why would they care? Um, I would really like to see more people my age getting access to nature and getting those memories that are so important. And I would like to explore what that would look like. Maybe doing more in schools, whether it's in classrooms or on field trips or both. Maybe teaching about like nature journaling because then you're learning to kind of be observant and take notice of little things and just spending time in nature. Um, and then one personal goal for me is to expand my Roots and Shoots group. I um, I really would like to connect with other environmental groups and other nonprofits and work together as one big group of young people um, to advocate for the orcas. Um, but I think unfortunately a lot of people my age don't have a lot of hope because you're seeing so much negative stuff on social media and on the news and at school. And it's so easy to kind of get lost in that. And you might think, like, what can I do to help and why should I care? But I believe that if those people saw or knew about the Salmon residents or had connections with nature, uh, they would have they would see that the orcas are worth fighting for. Um, and like I said, I'm 14 years old, so I don't have a lot of experience, but I look up to the advocates before me who have fought for many years, and I'm so inspired by those people who have been working tirelessly to help the orcas and the earth. So thank you so much for all of the positive changes you have made. And I've had so much support from my parents, my families, my teachers, my friends, the community. So thank you to all of you who have showed me so much support and encouragement. And thank you to the Orca Network for having me here and everyone for listening to me.
And thank you, Natalie, for rounding out our presentations. I hope everyone else has the same smile that I have on my face right now, because what an amazing and inspiring presentation from someone who's just starting out on their path. And it's really, it does the heart of someone who's been doing this as long as you have good to see it continuing on. I just want to ask if the panelists have any initial responses from what we have all shared with each other here before we start taking questions.
Well, I'd love to just thank Natalie for that presentation and for bringing up that concept of hope. And I'm wondering, Natalie, I know I read a book by Jane Goodall and Douglas Abrams about hope and why that's important. And then another one called Hope Matters. Do you think that taking action is a big part of why you have hope and you feel like you can make a change?
I'm sorry, it glitched out a little bit on the last part. Can you please repeat it? Your
Yeah,
question?
do you feel like it's because you take action that you're empowered and you have hope? Do you think that's an important part of your secret to success moving forward and being hopeful?
I think so, yeah, because when you're actually taking action and making changes, and you can kind of like when I was talking about Swan Creek, I think that's really inspiring and hopeful to me because we see the salmon during December and November, and also seeing how much we can like change the creek and make it better for them. And so by taking action, I think it is, and seeing the change is really empowering.
Thank you.
Uh-oh. Did we lose Natalie? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Stephanie, I would just like to take a moment in prayer for L128. Just how much the L pod has suffered over the decades, particularly, and you still have Ocean Sun being the matriarch and guiding and taking care of her family. So, in your own way, if you could just send some prayers and thoughts to the universe for L128 and her family.
Thank you, Renelle. And we've had a bunch of really great questions come in. The first one is about L128. This is a question that came into us ahead of time. We've already sent a response because, you know, of the answer, but wanted to have it here in case Michael wanted to expand on any of the information here. So the question was, it appeared that the calf, which appeared normal right after birth, was badly malnourished last it was being supported by a whale other than its mother. Have they found the mother as well as the body of the calf so that a necropsy can be performed?
Yeah, I can answer that. So no, we haven't found a body of the calf. We haven't actually confirmed that, you know, that the calf is missing yet. So we had Mark Mallison, a researcher with us, had an encounter with them where he found the calf L128 in really poor condition, but we haven't yet been able to have another encounter with L90. L90 was around that day, but we haven't had another encounter or multiple encounters with L90 to even confirm that the calf is missing at this point. So we don't know that the calf is gone, and we have not recovered a body. It's quite unlikely if L128 does pass away, it's unlikely that we will recover a body. It's very rare for us to find the bodies of not just calves, but any whale that we end up missing. We're still, there is always that slim, I just saw a comment come in, and there's always that slim possibility, even when we see whales in really bad shape, that they could bounce back. There's always that chance. I don't want to give any false hope. L128 was in really bad physical shape, and it's unlikely. But there's always that sliver of hope. And until we have more encounters with L90 to confirm, we still haven't declared L128 missing or deceased yet.
Okay. There was another question, and I think this was shared with the panelists ahead of time, so I'll let you respond to this as you will. Are there invasive species that are slowing down or preventing the reproduction of salmon or harming their habitat? And as a result, what are the impacts of this on the orcas?
I would say we do have invasive species. We have Atlantic salmon that can take habitat from native Pacific salmon. We have green crabs. We have sargassum. We have things like, you know, Pacific oysters that are not native to this area. But I don't think that anybody has shown that any one of those is, you know, is directly impacting salmon recovery in a way that, you know, I think it's always good to be trying to fix up the ecosystem, but in the, you know, in the looking at risks and value of effort and things like that, invasive species are important, but they're not as important as things like salmon recovery, vessel reduction, contaminant reduction, things like that.
I would like to add that there is one other component that's threatening our wild salmon and the health and the abundance of it, and that's the fish farms. The diseases that the fish farms carry and the lice that travel outside of those pens because they're just nets. They're not really contained. Shares the disease with the wild salmon, the healthy salmon, then becomes sick.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point, Raynell. And in Washington, I think we're lucky because, you know, a few years ago, we did pass a law that we don't want to have farmed Atlantic salmon in Washington state. And that was a really big move by some senators that pushed that bill through after the net pen collapse in 2017.
Yeah.
And I think there's some movement in British Columbia. People are thinking about, do we really want this? Is it really helping us? But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for bringing that up.
Okay, the next question is, I would like to hear the panelists chime in on recent headlines such as this: lack of salmon may not be the problem after all for endangered orcas, report suggests. That was in the Toronto Sun, stemming from the new paper. Prevalence of Chinook salmon is higher for southern than for northern resident killer whales in summer hotspot feeding areas. We have been hearing from fishers in the last few years, especially this year, that they are catching, quote, more salmon than ever, unquote. Yet southern residents aren't spending much time in the Salish Sea and are still failing to thrive.
Yeah, I'll chime in first just to kind of discuss what this paper kind of did and what it showed, and discuss a little bit about what it does say and what it might not say. So what this paper that recently got published did is they went out with essentially big old echo sounder, and they did some line transect surveys in different areas where southern residents are known to forage and where northern residents are known to forage. And they made some corrections for, you know, the depth and where they're finding the fish, and they came up with the answer that overall the numbers in southern resident foraging habitat were higher than in northern resident foraging habitat. So there's a few things to keep in mind with this study. One is both the survey in northern resident habitat and the survey in southern resident habitat both occurred over the course of a single week in 2020. So there was 1 week in 2020 in northern resident habitat, and then 1 week in 2020 in southern resident habitat in August and September. Basically a single week in both places. So this is really a very small snapshot of Chinook abundance in these areas at that point. There are some hiccups in the statistics of the paper that I won't get too deep into. If there are any data nerds who are really interested in it, you can maybe put a message in and we can chat about it. But there are some statistical issues with the paper. But yeah, and I think something that's interesting to keep in mind when we discuss these things is actually the northern residents, bizarrely, are a little less specialized on Chinook than the southerns are in general. When we look at their foraging profiles, the northerns, in the same period of time, when for the southerns we'd expect 80 to 95% of their diet to be Chinook, in the northerns it's closer to 70 or 80% of their diet. So they're still eating a lot of Chinook in the summer, but they're not as specialized. As I was saying to some of the panelists before we kind of got going, I do think these kinds of studies looking at really fine scale at where are the Chinook at what time of year and where might the shortages be happening and when, I think they are really valuable. I think we do need to be doing more of them because it can help you target particular populations and understand when the whales are at their most vulnerable. I just think we need to be very careful when we do studies like this to not blow our results out of proportion and make big sweeping claims that, at least in this case, go against, quite a bit of data we have showing that survival gets, is correlated with Chinook abundance and pregnancy failure is correlated with nutritional stress. So yeah, it's an interesting piece of data, but it doesn't really reverse everything else we know about these animals.
I agree with Michael. It's like consider the source. And, how scientific is that for just such a small period of time? The intention, in my opinion, wasn't to make it a very profound study that would hold accountability to it at all. Otherwise, they would have done a more extensive cut of what's happening with the population. And we know directly when there is development like that is happening at the Fraser River, the mouth with at Roberts Bank too, that when they do any digging at the mouth of the Fraser, that impacts the Fraser River salmon. When there's trolling and other things in Alaska, that impacts the Bristol Bay sockeye. It's just everything is connected, and that's our cultural belief as a Sakya. That is a belief that everything is connected, and you break one strand and it affects the whole.
Okay, thank you both. The next question is, what about having fisheries be terminal only? Would that help to rapidly increase salmon for the southern residents?
Well, I think we need to take a look at where the fisheries are happening. A lot of times our tribal fishermen are catching the fish after the southern resident killer whales as well. So when they're down in California and we're fishing up here, I think, we have to take a broader look at the population and when the fish run. And we also know that what's affecting the return of salmon to our rivers, amongst other things, is water temperature, is habitat, degradation. And there's, it's not one thing, it's a whole basket of issues that need to be addressed, all at once if we're very serious about saving salmon, about saving Quethalmich and the orcas, and if we're about saving our own quality of life.
Yeah, I really hear that, I personally think one of the things we're missing is recognizing the degree to which it is what happens to them happens to us. And we'd feel a lot more urgency if we were recognizing that on a more visceral level. The next question is, how many southern residents should there be for it to be a good, viable population?
This is a really interesting question. I don't think there's any one answer because now that we've kind of got a better handle on how much genetic diversity there might be and how much inbreeding might be affecting the population, it might be more about, effective population size and rather than actual number of animals if we're talking about a sustainable population. What we do know from, work that happened way, way back is based on the demographic trends and how many whales got captured and killed during the capture era, that the southern resident killer whale population historically probably had over 100 individuals. And this is, not way, way distant past. This is, 1900s.
Mhm.
So that's when I think about where I want the population to be, that is the golden goal that I have in my mind, is over 100 Southern residents. It seems like a really distant goal most of the time. But if you ask me, yeah, how many Southern resident killer whales do I think there should be? Um, well, I think there should be as many as we can get, but I think historically there should be over 100 of these whales in these waters.
Well, Michael brought up a good point. Is during the capture era, there were generations of births that were stolen away with the taking and the capture. And I think I agree with Michael. I would hope there would be more than 100 because we believe if we fix the environment, if we bring back the salmon, we reduce the noise reduction, we make it a healthy place to raise a family, it'll happen organically. But we have to work. We have to do it now.
I
From a
think
different angle, sorry. What can a Southern resident Orca fan who can't take on significant volunteer efforts because they work full time and also lacks significant funding to put toward recovery efforts do to make a difference? So limited time and limited funds, what can you do?
I'm going to say, Natalie, you take the first stab at that one.
Hi, I'm having a lot of problems with connection on my end. I just got kicked off, so I don't know what the question was. Is it in the chat?
I can read it to you again. The question
Thank you.
is, what can someone who does not have time or a lot of funding do to help recovery efforts? What can they do to make a difference?
I think like spreading the word would be good because the more people who know about the Southern residents and how unique and important they are, the more people will take action. And even if you don't have a lot of time or funding, still like keeping yourself up to date about what's happening with the orcas and um, spreading the word with other people. I know that's kind of a generic answer, but that's what I have.
I think it's a great answer. And I think, spreading the word with your friends and people that you know to think about that, but also thinking about, elected officials get a lot of phone calls every day. And I saw some people sending some text to the president about the Snake River dams. And I think that we forget that, what they're saying is, oh, I got 42 calls about homelessness. I got one about Southern resident killer whales. I got two about traffic. They gravitate towards things where they feel that the public is putting pressure on them.
Mhm.
And so that public pressure comes from groups like Orca Network showing up at the Capitol in Olympia and telling their legislators and showing up in DC or calling their legislators. And so, talking with people that make rules, those are the people that have the purse strings. We've got a lot of money, fortunately, in Washington coming in recently from the Infrastructure Act that was able to pull out culverts, do a lot of restoration. That money is probably going to dry up pretty soon. And it's important for us to recognize that those funds, we need more of those funds to come in. We have billions of dollars worth of culverts to remove and other things like that to do. So I think you're right, Natalie. Talking to people, talking to elected officials is really something that's doesn't take a ton of time and it's not super expensive to do.
I think the other thing that's really simple is if you're going to our beaches, take a garbage bag with you and pick up the garbage that's left on our beaches. Teach your children to leave where you're at in a better way than when you got there. That's so simple to do your part.
I'd like to quickly chime in as well, that, in addition to all of these really great specific things for the ocean and for southern resident killer whales, when I think about the end game here, and I think Raynell brought this up, if the water keeps getting hotter, we're not going to have Chinook salmon. And if we're not going to have Chinook salmon, then we're not going to have southern residents. So I do really think utilizing your political agency to promote and elect officials who take the planet getting hotter seriously is really important. I mean, it's such a big thing, and I think there are a lot of smaller or at least more specific things that we also need to be doing, and are, I think, maybe a bit more within the individual's capability. But when I think of what we're the big looming threat in the distance, that's what pops up in my mind, is the planet getting hotter.
And voting, right? We have some initiatives that are on our ballot in Washington State this fall. And I'm a scientist, I'm not an advocate, but some of these initiatives are taking away things like cap and trade that brings in a lot of money to fight climate change, taking away things that help subsidize people that are using solar, electric cars, other things like that. So be an active voter and be an active political participant is very important.
Great. Thank you. Those are wonderful suggestions. Thank you all for that. So we have a question now about boat noise, and there's kind of two questions that are going after the same sort of a similar theme. So I'm going to ask them both together and let you have at it. First is, do we have safe zones for orcas in the Puget Sound area? Are there no boat zones, or could there be, kind of similar to Robson Bight in northern Vancouver Island? And also, are there particular vessels that are especially detrimental to the southern residents, or is just any boat noise / traffic harmful?
I mean, I can talk about some of the historical perspective of no-go areas. We do have places that are voluntary no-go areas, like the west side of San Juan Island. But whenever we think about a no-go area, and Raynell will remind us, we have a lot of tribes with treaty rights that we impact their ability to go and fish and travel and harvest in places. So we have to be very careful about that. Some of the data that have come from, and I'm not an acoustics expert, but the two things that, the number of propellers and the speed at which boats travel are very important in how much noise they produce. So moving slowly is better than moving fast. And, having one propeller versus two propellers, there's high frequency noise that comes from fast boats, low frequency noise that travels a long distance from other boats. But keeping distance around animals and keeping speed slow around animals are two really, really important things. So you can basically have a moving no-go zone around whales by just doing those two things.
I would like to add that I went out with our late Chief Salik, as supported by our tribal council, and did 8 traditional ceremonies and feedings of live Chinook to our Quithalmachan, asking for their forgiveness and apologizing. And what we learned through the hydrophones and the pingings is just these large tankers, and that noise underwater can travel 10 miles. So think about that. We have one time we were out there going to a sacred place for ceremony, and there was a whale sighting, and there were, just like that, 35 boats zoomed right in. You wouldn't believe it if you didn't witness it. That has to stop. They're not keeping to the distance. And if you get 35 boats going at a fast pace, and we know noise travels 10 miles, that is so harmful. that I just don't understand why we don't stop that. You can observe whales from the land. They do that on many of our islands. They go out to the points and whale watch.
And yeah, I'll just add to that. So there are now Washington state laws in effect that do keep, it was just commercial whale watch vessels, and it's now it's going to be all vessels starting next year. That'll keep them basically 1,000 yards away. And I can't speak for Puget Sound. I don't spend a lot of time down there, but since those regulations for commercial boats came into place off San Juan Island, there's very little commercial vessel presence, commercial whale watch vessel presence, I should say, around the whales. There are still quite a few private boaters who aren't as plugged into the sightings, but they see whales and they stop, and they often don't know the regulations. And just as Joe said, it's about speed and it's about distance. So it'll be interesting to see how enforcement works out with that. That's a lot of area when you have spread out whales, trying to, for maybe one enforcement boat and Sound Watch trying to keep private vessels away. But it is, I think there's progress on the small boat front, in terms of, I don't think the small boats are going to be as much of an issue. But you brought up the tankers, and I see that as a real potential issue, because we now know it's not just the disturbance of the boats right next to the whales. We know it's actually the amount of noise they're receiving that is affecting their foraging success. And at a lot of times, just as you're saying, the soundscape of these key foraging areas is absolutely dominated by large vessels. And there's not much you can do. If you radio one of these large ships and tell them there's southern residents in their path, there's very little they're gonna do in terms of changing speed or direction. And a lot of that is just physics. It's a lot of mass moving through the water, and there's not much you can do on short notice to change how it's moving through the water. And it's only going to get worse with the new terminal up in Georgia Strait. So I think we really need to look closely on how we could regulate both the speed of these tankers, but I think more importantly, just the number of large vessels transiting through the area, because we don't know, is one tanker moving slightly slower but exposing the whales for a longer period of time any better than the same tanker moving very fast? It's not super clear, but it would probably be helpful to have fewer of them. So yeah, I think looking at the large boat issue, well, large ship, I think at that point it's a ship, issue is going to be important.
Well, here's another question that's related to noise, and that's what about windmills in the oceans? And I'm going to add to that tidal turbines, just as long as we're looking at all of this together.
Yeah, I think people are exploring that right now. People are exploring tidal turbines. There was a big movement probably 10 years ago to look at some specific sites, and more money was invested in the engineering of underwater turbines than it was in looking at the biological implications of that. But there's some renewed interest in Rosario Strait, and then some wave energy off island. And I think, it's one of those things where if we're going to think about getting off of fossil fuels, we need to entertain these things, but we need to make sure that the potential impact is not worse than the benefit that we're getting. And so I think it's, there's a lot of science that's involved in that. I think we don't do anybody any favors to just say, no, we're totally against putting something in the ocean. I think what we should be saying is we're against something that's going to further impact the ocean that's dying of 1,000 cuts right now, and be careful about that. So, I think people are looking at that, and I think it behooves us to pay attention to that and look at the science behind that.
Okay, another salmon question here. How much larger does the Chinook salmon population in the Salish Sea need to become in order to sustain or grow the southern resident killer whale population? Do we need 100,000 more, 1,000,000 more? Do we know what the magic number is?
Well, I think it's logic that if we restore the salmon to the rivers to the level that they are now no longer going extinct, would provide more of an abundance than is currently. I don't think it's logical to just say, well, there's 73 Quethalmachans, so they eat 200 pounds a day times 365 times the number in the population. I just think we need to restore our rivers, our habitat, to the spawning areas and the survival of the salmon in the ocean to come back to those rivers. Let's count those. How many are coming back? How many are spawning?
Yeah, and I completely agree that it's not enough to just say what's the bare minimum that a killer whale needs to do its basic, metabolic functions, and it's also important to consider the whole ecosystem. I know when we look at these very high level kind of statistical relationships between survival and reproduction and the number of Chinook, or the relative abundance, I should say, of Chinook, we need a huge increase in Chinook to get our whales where we want them to be, 50%, 100% increases in salmon, a scale of recovery that, is hardly even being discussed in a lot of these salmon management circles.
Well, keeping on the salmon theme, here's two more questions kind of wrapped together. Why don't orcas seem to gorge themselves in late summer where Chinook congregate, such as outside the Ballard Locks or the mouth of the Duwamish River? And a question about whether boat noise mitigates against that. But then another question is asking, do you know how the southern resident killer whale diet varies by season? Have studies been done that identify critical seasonal metabolic or energetic demands? And are those seasonal demands able to be met with available food sources? The suggestion that maybe other species in addition to Chinook are important there.
I'll
I
take
think
that. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, logically, we don't see our southern residents as much as we used to. And then you say, well, why is that? Why be here? They can't forage. There's not enough food. So they seem to be spending more and more time in Northern California.
And I was just going to add, yeah, there was a paper that came out recently looking at seasonal changes in diet in the southern residents using prey samples and fecal samples. I think mostly fecal samples. And yeah, in kind of late fall and early winter, they're actually, at least where we're sampling them, where NOAA is sampling them, they're relying more on chum salmon than Chinook. Oh, someone's asking for the title of the paper. Let me find it quickly for you.
Is that Brad Hanson's paper? I can grab it for you.
It was, yeah.
I'll grab it and put it in the chat.
In I think it was in Proc B or something, one of the Royal Society journals. And so they do rely quite heavily on other species at other times of the year, but in the summer months, even as Chinook is depleted in a lot of their areas, they're still really heavily dependent on it. So there are seasonal changes. They, at least, we're sampling them in the fall and winter. When they get sampled, it's mostly in Puget Sound, and so that's where they're eating a lot of chum. They'll eat some sablefish and stuff when they have to. But it does really seem like Chinook is the preferred prey, and they only really switch in the times of year where it'd be really quite hard to find Chinook without going pretty far offshore. Yeah, there's that paper, Joe, and then there's another one that got published like a month ago.
Okay,
which
I'll bring that one up.
I'll try to find when I'm done in a second. I'll put it in the chat. But yeah, I don't know if I can answer too much about why they don't congregate, in those places where the Chinook are really dense, other than they're hard places to get to. They're potentially very low salinity places, which could be bad for their skin, and noise and disturbance potentially as well.
Okay, thank you. What about discussion about the Alaskan fisheries and limiting the number of fish taken there? Fish from our area do not have the opportunity to make it to the Salish Sea and into a southern resident killer whale mouth. I'm not sure if this person was asking from Alaska or what, but we know that some of the salmon do wind up, some of our salmon wind up in the up in Alaska. And maybe some of the wild caught Alaskan salmon are actually salmon that could be southern resident food. So is there any discussion about limiting that?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion right now, and the scientists are battling that a little bit right now about how much of our Chinook are being caught in Alaskan fisheries and how many of those animals would return down to feed southern residents and probably feed northern residents as well. And so I think that's getting played out in the courts. There was a recent shutdown of fisheries because of how many Chinook that they caught up there. I don't think that the data are in right now to know if those are Puget Sound Chinook or where those Chinook were from. But I think people are paying attention to that. We used to always say, oh, you're fine to eat Alaskan salmon, but I think people are rethinking that, and some of those battles are going on in the courts right now.
Okay. Will the treatment with, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, natrix affect salmon and orca? It's a copper-based poison just released into the Snake River for invasive mollusks and expected to kill fish. And the question asker says last time they used it, they had to remove 5 to 6 tons of dead fish.
Yeah, I'm not familiar. I can't comment on that.
It doesn't sound good. Okay, another Snake River question. Please explain the connection between removing Snake River dams and thus increasing Columbia River salmon, and how this is tied into salmon in the Salish Sea that move in and out of the Salish Sea rivers,
No,
not the big Columbia
process.
rivers.
I mean,
Yeah, I would say, that Hansen paper that I put up there shows that southern residents are feeding off the mouth of the Columbia. And so I think it's not as much as that those fish from the Snake River dams are coming into the Salish Sea as that's a food source for southern residents in the spring and in the fall. It's kind of why the Snake River dams are a big issue. I mean, you, Michael and Raynell and Natalie, you probably have more to comment on that.
well, we think, as Indigenous people, that is the territory of many Indigenous people that's sacred to them. And we don't own the rivers, we don't own the sky, we don't own the trees. And it's all part of Mother Earth that we respect and have a reciprocal relationship with. And the dams are not normal, and they do affect and change the natural way of life. And it's destroying the habitat that's destroying, I think there's over 100 and some species that are in danger because of those dams on the Snake River. So when you look at, I think, Joe, you mentioned it, looking at the whole, it's not just this or that. It's like what we say, it's the winged, the finned, the two-legged, the four-legged, excuse me, wasn't. That, so you have to take that all into consideration, that there was an abundance of salmon on the Snake River before the dams went up. And there isn't any logic or any study that's valid that shows why they can't come down. It's political, it's funding, it's money, it's greed.
Moving on to another salmon passage question. How much impact do you think the culvert replacement projects will have, and over what time frame?
I mean, this is my personal opinion. I think they're going to have a huge impact, but the time frame of salmon is 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. So it takes a lot of time but those culverts are ranked as being high value culverts for runs that are, endangered and things like that. And so I think the effort really is to take out the most high value, highest returns culverts first, but then everybody wants to pull all of them out eventually. And so, that's a very long-term process, but I think we'll start seeing benefits, within a couple of years.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. It's a start.
Okay, and what, in your opinion, is the most important thing that you are doing and you would like to see others do as individuals to help restore this population?
I'm gonna say, Natalie, you go with this one.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd hear from Natalie on this one. Did you hear the question okay?
What is the most important thing that that we are doing? What would we like to see more people do?
Yeah.
Here, I'm gonna turn off my camera. Can you hear me still?
Uh-huh.
Okay. I think that I would like to see more people talking about it. Well, since I was talking about youth advocacy, I'll tie that in. I would like to see more people talking about it in schools, especially at younger levels. So, like more. I don't think I really heard. I didn't hear anything about salmon until 8th grade, so that was last year in school. So I think that we should hear, since salmon are so important to our ecosystem, talking about it in science classes in younger levels. Then I think that would be more impactful for students. If that kind of answers the question, I'm not sure.
It does. That's
Yeah.
very good. I would like to add what I think we've started the work, and I saw Chris Kevorkian is tuning in as well. And it's the movement to the rights of nature. And, New Zealand, Brazil, Peru, a lot of those Ecuador countries have given rights of nature to the Amazon, to in Ponca here in the United States, in the Oklahoma area, have given rights of the river. Nez Perce was looking at the same thing. I brought movement rights from California up to talk to the Lemhi Indian Business Council about the potential of movement rights for the Salish Sea, which would in effect be another layer of protection over and above our sovereignty and our treaty rights. It would say, because there are rights of the Salish Sea, anything that would harm or encumber the health or the welfare would have to go through like an indigenous knowledge impact study, which isn't included in any of the Canadian impact studies of the US. There is no indigenous component to it as to what's that going to do to traditional knowledge, to sacred rights. But if we did that like the other countries are doing and taking the lead, and the UN is supporting that work, we can do it for the Salish Sea, movement rights for the Salish Sea. So they have to take that into consideration with any expanding of any project or anything that would harm our water or any of our relatives or beings in the water.
Yeah, I would add that, even as a scientist, I think one of the most important things we do is vote and speak to our elected officials. And those are the people that help set the stage about where do we spend our money? How do we set our priorities? What are we going to work on? We're going to work on things that benefit human health, wildlife health, environmental health, or not. Are we going to do other things with our time and our interest? And so I think, making sure that you vote and pay attention to what's going on. And then even in non-elective seasons, making sure that those elected officials know what's important to you.
I'd like to, in addition to all those things, which I think are awesome and really, really important, I'd like to get on my own personal hobby horse, which is to say sometimes direct action is useful as well, by which I mean protest and exercising your right to protest. If this includes, particular developments, fossil fuel developments, developments involving terminal expansions, I think it's important to vote and to talk to your legislators and to make your voice heard in more direct ways when necessary.
Mm-hmm.
I'd just like to add to what Natalie was saying too about, engaging younger people and doing things in schools. In my 30 years doing environmental education, I've really seen a shift away from outdoor education, from the opportunities that give young people the opportunity to create those memories and have those experiences that create those memories that lead to that action. And a lot of it's being replaced with, the virtual alternative, because it's faster and it's cheaper. And there's a lot of reasons why that's true. But I really think that, and I know that Washington has the No Child Left Inside bill, which hopefully will really help with this. But if there are teachers out there in the audience tonight, let us know how we can support you in creating those experiences, because that's certainly part of what brought me down the road that I'm on with this. And, I know that's true for a lot of other people. Couple more questions have come in now. Natalie, how can all the nonprofits, individuals, et cetera, help you with your goal of getting more young people involved?
I think that I'm still working on kind of what the what the steps need to be, and kind of it what it could look like. But I would really like to connect with more nonprofits, groups, individuals who care about the orcas and want to get youth involved. So just, I don't know, I think having like doing some networking so I could kind of talk to these people and see what our next steps can be, and like what we like kind of form a group first, so we know kind of what we need to do to go from there, if that makes sense. I can also have if there's any like groups and things, I can have Orca Network send them my information so we can talk more.
That totally makes sense. Thank you, Natalie. Okay, a question about the increase in wildfires because of climate change. Have there been any recent studies on the effects of firefighting chemicals on salmon in the rivers that are in the fire areas?
I'm not aware of those studies if they do exist.
Yeah, I'm also not aware. I just wanted to plug that. I think there's a general trend that we tend to figure out what chemicals are bad for salmon many years after they've already been put into the environment. I'm not saying that these chemicals are of that class, but these things happen very slowly. These toxicants get identified very slowly. So even if it was an issue, take a while to figure it out.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground tonight, and tonight is not meant to be where we find the final answer to this complex question of what needs to change for Southern resident recovery. But I would just like to ask our panelists if they have any final thoughts or, want to have a little conversation about where we go from here.
I think I just want to restate, we did this to Mother Earth, and it's going to take us all working together to heal her and to make a real commitment that we're going to walk on the path and take that journey together, to work hard, to listen to one another, to respect one another, and do the hard work that's necessary. It has to begin now.
I'll jump in. I'd just like to say thanks to everybody. I mean, it's inspiring to me that everybody here tonight's taking 2 hours out of their life to think about this, to talk about this, to connect on this. And that's the sort of thing, that's the effort that we need to get this moving forward. And so I think everyone, one, be proud of yourselves, know that I have a lot of gratitude for you, and keep up the effort. And like Natalie was saying, it's not always easy, but by taking action, you're empowered, and that's what gives us all hope. So I'm hopeful because of all of you being here tonight.
Yes, I'm also very hopeful since everyone is here, and I think having a discussion like this is really good and really helpful, and I would like to kind of keep this in mind and maybe think about more of what we need to do in the future.
Yeah, I'll just chime in and say, thanks again to the other panelists and to Orca Network and to all of you who are listening, but also just the amazing questions you're sending in, the kind of depth with which folks are not just listening but thinking about this and posing these questions is really good to see. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your thoughts, and everyone in the audience as well. I hope that you will carry on the information that was shared, the questions that were asked, and anything else that inspires you from tonight's webinar into your conversations with your friends and family and coworkers. And if you want to keep that conversation going, please drop me an email. It's just stephanie@orcanetwork.org, and I'm happy to explore ways that we can continue having this conversation in an ongoing way, because as Raynell says, we need to do it, but we can't do it without figuring out how we're, what we're going to do, and we can all do that together. I see that Susan has popped on the screen. Did you want to add anything, Susan?
Yes, I just wanted to apologize. I was trying to get in on my other account earlier, so I wasn't able to say hello. And I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, all the panelists, and thank Stephanie and Cindy for pulling this together, and Raynell and Joe and Michael and Natalie. Thank you all for all your wonderful words of wisdom and all you do. And as hard as it is to talk about these things and sometimes become dispirited, when we come together like this, it also really inspires us. And I think it's really important to get together and to talk about these things and re-inspire each other. And everyone, like Joe said, everyone who took 2 hours out of their evening tonight to talk about these things that are difficult to talk about, you give us inspiration as well. And all of us together You know, what else is there to do but to keep trying our hardest? We love these whales, and they're our inspiration as well. And so thank you all very much. Really appreciate it.
Haishka, Susan. Haishka.
Nice to get to you too. Lovely to see you all.
And I'll mention also that Saturday is Orca Recovery Day. There are things going on all over the place that you can get involved in. So if you need to get your hands in the dirt right now, or, you know, get out and learn some more, pick up some litter on a beach, something like that, there's lots of different things happening. And I think we have a slide for, I know that we're doing stuff at the Langley Whale Center and at Coronet Bay. Joe and Michael, are you guys have anything going on at CDOC or Center for Whale Research that day?
Not at CDOC that day, no.
I don't.
Children of the Setting Sun has an event October 22nd at the Paramount Theater. It's Netsama, One Heart, One Mind. And the whole goal is to provide leadership that leads to hope and unity. It's all people.
I'll be there.
Yes.
Looking forward to it.
Look forward to seeing you, Haishka.
Okay, I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that today is the first day of Orca Network's annual online auction. Cindy can post the link in the chat. Please check it out and help to support Orca Network's programs, and that auction runs until October 29th. And I just want to say, yes, Haishka, thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is a conversation that means so much to me personally, and I'm so excited to see us get it started, because again, this is not the end of this conversation by any means. So thank you, Raynell, Joe, Michael, and Natalie for your time and your words tonight. Thank you to each of you for joining us. Again, just drop me an email if you want to continue the conversation, and I just really appreciate everyone being here. We'll leave the call open a little bit longer if people want to have any further conversation, because look at that, we're ahead of time.
Haishka.